is where we were yesterday, people. Get off this road. Hang on.
Keep the peace! Keep the peace!
It's just been traumatic for everybody involved. It's affected not just one, but it's in fact affected both communities. This used to be one community, now it's two.
And my guess is people went home last night with their kids and they looked at themselves and said, you know, this isn't really the way we want to live.
And we are joined now by Christie Blatchford, author of Helpless, Caledonia's Nightmare of Fear and Anarchy, and How the Law Failed All of Us. Nice to have you in this studio.
Well, thank you. Nice
to be here.
It's been
ages since you were here. Okay, we're not going to assume, because we get a lot of new Canadians who watch this program who probably didn't even live in this province when all this took place. So we're not going to assume everybody knows what we're talking about. We want to remind people what happened. There's a residential subdivision in Caledonia, which is near Hamilton. What happened on that subdivision?
In February of 2006, a very small group of natives from the nearby Six Nations Reserve, for a variety of reasons, came onto the land, occupied it, blocked the entrance, and stopped the 100 or so workers who were on the construction site throwing up new houses. That's the least interesting part to me. What is interesting to me is how the police policed it, because immediately they treated it as a expression of a native land claim, not as an illegal occupation, not as anything that required policing. It was a hands-off, eyes averted kind of policing. And from there it went. For the first 3 months, I guess, it was peaceful. The builder went to the Ontario courts, tried to get injunctions, did get them. The OPP didn't enforce them. These would be injunctions getting the protesters off the land. During that time, the number of protesters grew. It became a bit of a no-go zone for all sorts of people across the continent, actually. And by April the 20th, when the OPP made I think an ill-planned early morning raid to arrest the main occupiers, which they did succeed in doing, the organizers on the land had a phone tree, got a whole bunch of other people, hundreds of people came, it's just a couple of clicks away from Six Nations, hundreds of other supporters showed up, drove the OPP off, and never again did they go back on that land, really, in the interim, with very few exceptions.
The land claim that the Aboriginal groups feel has not been well attended to for the large number of years that it's been outstanding. In your view, does that explain why these protests and occupation of the area took place in the first place?
Yeah, I do think I think there's a tremendous argument to be made that there are hundreds of land claims working their way through the bureaucracy. I think it is almost deliberately opaque. I think it is deliberately slow. I forget what the average time it takes for one to get through the process. It's a federal process, but it's forever. So certainly that contributes to the general frustration, absolutely. The problem is that in this particular case, on this particular piece of land, and I'm oversimplifying it hugely, this is not my area of expertise, and that's why I didn't write about it particularly in the book. In this particular claim, the Six Nations elected council has never said the land was improperly sold. What they've said is we didn't get enough money for it.
We'll come back to this, because
okay.
I got some stuff on this later on that will explain this more.
Sure. The Confederacy, the traditional non-elected chiefs, on the other hand, say that their predecessors who signed the sale document were tricked, that it was meant to be a lease. So I believe, in my opinion, there's a lot of confusion internally within Six Nations itself about what exactly is the claim, but there's a overriding sense of grievance and wrong.
Before all this happened, how well or badly did natives and non-natives get along in this area?
Well, I think in hindsight, people put an awfully glossy shine on it. But I think in truth, it was a very functional community. Natives and non-natives intermarried. They're all I mean, even the former mayor has relatives from Six Nations. Everybody does. They played hockey together. It was not perfect, but it was pretty damn good. And I think, to be honest, it's probably on its way back to reaching that state again, not because of anything the Ontario government has done or any of the BS negotiators who have been, largely ineffective, but rather because most people are people of goodwill on both sides of this area.
After a while, it became apparent to many people that the police were policing this situation vis-a-vis the Aboriginals in a particular way. And I guess one of the things that your book has tried to figure out is, why did that take place? So let's see if we can figure this out. Was there a directive from the Ontario government at any point in this drama to the Ontario Provincial Police saying, lay off the Aboriginals, we don't want any trouble here?
Not to my knowledge, though I am not sure it does not exist. I didn't have time to do the Freedom of Information request as I was writing the book. It was on a tough deadline, but I'm optimistic that one day I'll know the answer to that. But in a general way, and here I defer to John Tory, who was the leader of the provincial Conservatives at that time, and who was raising the Caledonia question in the House every day. And he says there are ways that your boss can make you understand perfectly well what he wants you to do without ever putting it in writing or telling you what to do. And we all have that, When my boss wants me to do it a certain way, I know. He gets all terse and quiet.
And he doesn't have to put it in a memo.
He certainly doesn't. And so Mr. Tory's view is that that's probably at minimum what happened in this case. The Ontario government, remember, the Dalton McGuinty government, raised Ipperwash, which is the biggest previous occupation that went wrong in this province. At Ipperwash, a native occupier named Dudley George was shot to death by a member of the OPP.
1995.
1995.
Just a few months after the Mike Harris government was elected. So they didn't have a lot of experience in this, is the point I guess I'm making.
Yes. No, they didn't. And but, there was a protracted... Every day the Liberals got up, they were then in opposition, they got up in the House and said, Mr. Premier, to Mike Harris, when are you going to call an inquiry into Ipperwash? Questions every day. They hammered them on it. And it was certainly, I think, one of the horses on which they rode to electoral victory. It was certainly one of the promises Mr. McGuinty made. So he gets elected. Sure enough, he calls the inquiry. That inquiry down the road near Sarnia is going on even as this occupation starts. And the one thing I think you can be absolutely sure of is that the Liberal government did not want to have a Dudley George on their hands. And I don't blame them. I have never advocated that the OPP should have gone in with truncheons swinging and gunfire. My only sort of belief is that they should have enforced the laws. They would enforce it with you and I. And that was crystal clear from the get-go that they didn't.
Okay, again, they didn't because we're not sure there's a memo out there,
but
a directive.
There's certainly political in the air.
Is it possible, though, that the police could have come to that determination anyway without any political direction?
Yes, it is, because at the time, the OPP commissioner was Gwen Boniface, who had made her bones on, promoting Aboriginal policing, which is a good thing. But she was less a cop's cop and more of a, kind of a policy cop's cop. And, she, under her watch, the Aboriginal policing branch had become much bigger. It was under her that Ron George, the first cousin of the slain Dudley George from Ipperwash, was appointed as the top Aboriginal officer in Ontario, and he was the lead guy on the ground in Caledonia during the occupation. I think that was tremendously unfair to him. It was like Alan Eagleson in the old days. He was now an agent, now an entrepreneur, now the representative of Hockey Canada. It took a long time for all those hats to reveal themselves as a conflict. And I think that Inspector George was also in a position of conflict.
As it became apparent that the police were, in your view, using kind of two tiers of justice here, treating Aboriginals...
It's not my view. It's what they admitted in court.
Okay. If officers went to their superiors and said, why are we doing this?
They did do that.
And what kind of answers did they get?
They were disciplined, they were transferred, they were told to shut up. This is how we're doing it. And never forget that, there's a strong paramilitary strain that runs through any police force. There has to be. They have to take orders, even when they don't like them or when they disagree with them. these guys, there were, you know, at least a half dozen officers that I know of, some of them senior officers, probably more, who made their discontent with the kind of policing that was going on in Caledonia absolutely clear, both to their bosses at the OPP and to their police association. And their police association president, Carl Walsh, is quoted throughout the book saying just that. They were inundated with complaints by their members. Nothing changed.
When local residents went to the police or went to politicians to say, there's a double standard of justice here, can you guys please do something about it? What happened?
Well, they were painted as outsiders, and in one instance, at that time, one of the lead instigators, I suppose, was Gary McHale, who didn't live in Caledonia. But he didn't get involved in any of the protests until all of the violence really was done, virtually all of it. Yet Julian Fantino, the new member for Vaughan, for the Tories.
New cabinet minister in Mr. Harper's government.
The junior minister for seniors,
Yes,
as I like to remind people. He was then the OPP commissioner. He'd taken over at the end of 2006. And he, under his leadership, the force continued in exactly the same path that they had been going on. And except that under him, Gary McHale was targeted for what I think really amounted to harassment. There were arrest teams waiting for him. He was put in jail overnight.
I've got an exchange here. Can I put this up?
Please, yeah.
Let me do this. This is from your book. This is Detective Sergeant Bernie Cowan from the OPP and Gary McHale. Michael, let's bring this graphic up. Here's the conversation that you've got quoted in the book. Here's, first of all, the officer. We will allow you to raise flags and ribbons, just not across from Douglas Creek Estates. Anybody who attempts to do that will be arrested for breach of the peace. So Gary says, so have the natives been arrested for putting up their flags? They have not. Gary comes back. Why? You said anyone. Your words were, anyone who tries to put up flags will be arrested for breach of the peace. Bernie Cowan comes back. That's today I'm talking about. Gary, well, you know what my plan is? Bernie Cowan, what's your plan? Gary says, my plan is to make you guys look like a bunch of assholes, and you've done a great job of helping achieve that. You do nothing when the power station was destroyed, you did nothing when the bridge was burned down, and now we're talking about a simple flag, and the natives have their flags up, and there was no violence. Yes, indeed, McHale was arrested after that exchange, and what did you think of that exchange? What did that indicate to you?
Well, I mean, first of all, as I recall, that officer and the other officers who were involved in that were actually quite senior investigators from a different branch of the OPP, and I was astonished that they would be put on road duty to inform a citizen of what you heard there. Secondly, and I feel compelled to say this, you have to understand how aggrieved Mr. McHale felt, because he doesn't swear. I mean, even in my presence, and I am notoriously profane.
You've got a foul mouth. There's no doubt about it.
I absolutely do. And even in my presence, he doesn't sort of relax his standards. So that tells you how, you know, aggrieved he felt. And then he was, I'm mixing maybe apples and oranges here, Steve. I haven't read my own book in a while. I took Christmas off. But I believe this is the occasion where he was arrested and held overnight on what was really quite a non-charge, and was let go the next morning without charge. A little while later, at another rally, he only ever participated at that time in 2 rallies, he was arrested on what surely was a shocking charge. It was called, I
remember your description of it, yes.
It was attempting to encourage someone to breach the peace. In other words, the breach of the peace hadn't happened, but he was charged with encouraging someone to do what hadn't happened. Mm-hmm. And or maybe that was even this instance. It was a ludicrous charge. It was a charge that one judge at least had never heard of, one Crown attorney had never heard of. And the only reason he was charged was so that the court could impose restrictive bail conditions, travel conditions upon him, which kept him out of Caledonia for more than 2 years. And by that time he had friends, he had legitimate business connections there, and he could not go in that town for 2 years. Finally, in the end, the Crown attorney very recently withdrew the charge.